to The Radical King. It was about Dr. Martin Luther King. Another was Alicia Asano, who's a ministerial intern at First Church Boston. And then finally from Travis Smiley from PBS. Every January, people of goodwill remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They go to events on his birthday, maybe they sing in a choir. If their church is a liberal one, they have a sermon about the great Dr. King. And then by this time every January, they go back to doing what they ordinarily do. For the vast majority of us, Dr. King was a great man of nearly mythical proportions. We forget, or we never knew the real King. We forget that he was reviled by many, and it wasn't just the KKK or those in positions of power who disagreed with him or outright hated him. In the last year of King's life, his approval ratings were in the range of Trump's numbers. Think of that for a minute. They were Trumpian. In the last year of King's life, he had fallen from the ranks of the most admired Americans. He was disinvited to the White House. He was forsaken by friends, abandoned by supporters who had sustained his work and his witness, and he was dismissed by the media that had championed his cause. King had a deep and abiding love for his own people, but many of them turned their backs against him in the last year of his life. The scorn of being unwelcome to preach in black churches was particularly painful to him. King was also being ridiculed by black elites like Roy Wilkins, Adam Clayton Powell, and even Justice Thurgood Marshall. And for everyday blacks, and especially for the youth, King's message of nonviolence was falling on deaf ears. Sometimes the truth is so subversive and unsettling that we can't handle it in real time. The terrain of history is dotted with prophetic truth tellers who we came to appreciate much too late. King's vehement opposition to the war in Vietnam cost him dearly. We now know that King wasn't so much alone as he was early, and he was right. Indeed, in the last year of King's life, it's a cautionary tale about what happens to a society that ignores its truth tellers on racism or poverty, militarism, patriarchy, the environment, white supremacy. One of the things that King was most hated for was his understanding of the interrelatedness of all of oppression. King refused to silence his voice in his quest for unarmed truth and unconditional love. For King, the condition of truth was to allow suffering to speak. For him, justice was what love looked like in public. In King's eyes, too many black leaders sacrificed the truth for access to power or reduced sacrificial love and service to selfish expediency and personal gain. In stark contrast to that, King once told his staff, "I'd rather be dead than afraid." Although much of what America did not know about the Radical King, the FBI and the US government knew. They called him the most dangerous man in America. They knew Reverend King was a revolutionary Christian, sincere in his commitment, and serious in his calling. They knew he was a product of a black prophetic tradition, and as Cornel West put it, full of fire in his bones, love in his heart, light in his mind, and courage in his soul. For King, dissent did not mean disloyalty. In fact, dissent was a high form of patriotism. When he said that the US government was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, he wasn't trashing our country. He was telling the painful truth about a country he loved. King was never anti-American. He was always anti-injustice in our country and everywhere else. Love of truth and love of country could go hand in hand to him. The radical king was a spiritual giant who tried to shatter the callousness and indifference of his fellow citizens. King believed that indifference to evil is more evil than evil itself. The radical king was at one point, while he was a very human person with human failings, he was a moral titan with profound allegiance to his roots, which was the Black prophetic tradition and the Black freedom struggle. According to West, for King, the struggle against the legacy of white supremacy was never a strategic move or a tactical afterthought. Rather, it was a profound existential and moral matter of great urgency. The radical king understood the role of class analysis in his focus on the poor and working people. The radical king was first and foremost a revolutionary Christian, a Black Baptist minister and pastor whose intellectual genius and rhetorical power was deployed in the name of the gospel of Jesus Christ. King understood this good news to be primarily radical love in freedom and radical freedom in love, an enactment, a reenactment here and now of the beloved community. And when you think about his disenfranchisement from us in the last year of his life, it was because he understood the interrelatedness of everything. And his speaking out about the Vietnam War was not just rooted in concerns about minority people, but about justice and all people, not just people of our country, but all people of the world. He was truly looking for that beloved community. Like his most worthy theological precursor, the Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman, Dr. King pulled from the rich insights of Western thinkers, yet he elevated the lived experience of wounded, scarred, and bruised bodies of enslaved and Jim Crowed Black people to enact radical love. Like his great contemporary, Dorothy Day, who formed the Catholic worker movement, she looked at the world through the lens of her heart. Dr. King understood radical love as a relentless and ongoing self-examination of his fears, his hates, and his ego in order to be reborn into a courageous, loving, and sacrificial person. For both Day and King, this radical love flowed from an imitation of Christ, a response to an invitation for self-surrender in order to emerge fully equipped to fight for justice in a cold and cruel world of domination and exploitation. We praise and honor Dr. King and hold him up as the highest standard of struggle for justice. We as a society measure all who struggle for justice against Dr. King, but not against who he actually was. We measure them against who we've decided King was some 50 years later, which is a sanitized version of the actual man. As a society, we tell activists that their protests are too unruly, their demands too harsh, their voices too strident, their methods too stringent. We've decided as a society that there is one way to struggle for justice, and it's the way we like to imagine Dr. King struggled for justice, even though it's not what he actually did. In the summer of 2016, protesters took to the streets around the country, condemning police brutality and proclaiming that Black Lives Matter. As has happened over and over again with these sorts of protests, many people criticize their methods and tactics. Apparently, we've forgotten that King's Selma March entailed hundreds of people walking down a highway, crossing a bridge, and blocking cars from being able to drive on it. Because when people do that today, we criticize them and tell them they need to be more like Dr. King. This flawed understanding of King has seeped into our society's understanding of what's acceptable or appropriate in the struggle for racial justice or for justice anywhere. Decades after his death, America has had a reckoning with the life and legacy of King. And it took us a while, but we eventually came to see him for what he was and still is, America's GPS. I liked that when I saw that, America's GPS. That sums it up, because our destiny as a country is linked to how seriously we take King's legacy and how we live it. In these times of moral urgency, we do need to do more than celebrate King once a year. We need to look at the real King, to understand the true radical nature of his ministry. And we need to live our lives as close to that radical King as we can. I'm not saying become Baptist, because I'm sure not going to. And we sure can't change a race. And I wish I could preach eloquently and spontaneously like King, but I can't. I have to have this. That's just a reality. I've, over the years, just come to accept that, you know what, a shy person is not going to get up at a podium and speak like King. Much as I would like it to happen, it isn't going to happen. That's not my authentic self, and I'd be a fake failure if I even tried. To live like King is to live our authentic life in a bold and fearless way, speaking truth to power in ways large and small, but in our own unique way, using our own unique talents. May we each find our own way to be a cheerleader for justice 365 days a year. May it be so. So for the closing song, we have number 1017, Building a New Way. We have sung this before, but it's been a while. So Terry's going to play it through once so we kind of get it, and then we'll do this.